New Orleans, Louisiana, October 2003. Maria Delgado adjusted her digital camera strap, the weight of her equipment bag pulling at her shoulder as she stood before the wrought iron gates of the old Marigny station. The autumn heat pressed against her skin like damp fabric, but something else made her shiver. A coldness that seemed to seep from the weathered brick walls of the converted railway station. Historic charm meets modern convenience, she muttered to herself, rehearsing the pitch she'd give to potential buyers. At 32, Maria had built her reputation on breathing life back into New Orleans' forgotten properties. This particular bungalow, crafted from the bones of a 1920s railway depot, would be her masterpiece if she could shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with it. The realtor's key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been waiting. Inside, afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across hardwood floors that had once felt the thunder of departing trains. The conversion had been skillful. The main waiting area now served as a spacious living room, ticket windows transformed into kitchen pass-throughs, and the old platform extended into a covered patio overlooking an overgrown garden. Maria began her documentation routine, snapping photos of each room while dictating notes into her handheld recorder. Original brick walls preserved, exposed beam ceiling, period-appropriate light fixtures. But, as she worked, she noticed peculiarities that hadn't appeared in the preliminary inspection reports. In what had been the station master's office, now a cozy den, children's toys were scattered across the floor despite the property being vacant for 3 years. A wooden train set, its paint faded and chipped, formed an intricate track that seemed to spiral inward toward the center of the room. Maria crouched to examine the toys more closely, her camera flash illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. The temperature dropped suddenly, her breath visible for just a moment before the warmth returned. She dismissed it as an old building's quirk until she heard the whistle. Faint and distant, like an echo from decades past, the sound of a train horn drifted through the walls. Maria froze, listening, but heard only the hum of the central air conditioning. She checked her recorder. The sound hadn't been captured. Just the neighborhood, she told herself. Freight trains still run nearby. But freight trains didn't sound like that. High and mournful, more like a child's toy than a diesel engine. In Austin, Texas, same day Jacob Morales descended into the crystal-clear waters. Of Jacob's well, his underwater camera housing sealed tight against his chest. At 25, Maria's cousin had explored caves across Texas, but this dive felt different. The opening to the underwater tunnel system stretched before him like a mouth, its limestone, walls narrowing into passages that had claimed the lives of 8 divers over the decades. The water temperature dropped as he entered the first chamber, his diving light cutting through the darkness. 20 feet down, 30, 40. The walls closed in until he could barely extend his arms. This was the danger zone, where panic had trapped so many before him. But Jacob was experienced, methodical. He checked his air supply, adjusted his buoyancy, and pressed deeper into the tunnel. His camera captured the ethereal beauty of the limestone formations the way his light transformed the underwater cave into a cathedral of stone and shadow. It was at 60 feet that he first heard his name. The sound came through the water itself, impossibly clear despite his regulator. Jacob, Jacob, a child's voice, high and sweet, echoing off the tunnel walls. He spun around, his light sweeping across the passage behind him, but found only empty water. Nitrogen narcosis, he reasoned. The mind played tricks at depth, but the voice came again, closer this time, and with it, the faint outline of something pale moving just beyond his light's reach. Jacob's training took over. He began his ascent, but the tunnel seemed longer now, stretching endlessly upward. His air gauge showed plenty of breathing gas remaining, but his heart hammered against his ribs. The pale shape followed him, always just at the edge of visibility, and the voice continued calling his name with increasing urgency. Jacob, don't leave us, Jacob. When he finally broke the surface, gasping and trembling, 3 other divers were waiting by the shore. They'd heard him calling for help underwater, something that should have been impossible with a regulator in his mouth. In New Orleans, evening, Maria's second visit to the Marigny station property came at dusk, when the golden hour would provide the best lighting for her promotional photos. She'd spent the afternoon researching the building's history, uncovering details that made her increasingly uneasy. The railway station had been built in 1924 over a filled sinkhole where a limestone cave had collapsed during construction. 7 workers had been trapped in the flooded cavern, their bodies never recovered. The station operated for 60 years before being abandoned in the 1980s then. Sat empty until a developer converted it into a residence in the late 1990s. 3 different families had attempted to live there. None stayed longer than 6 months. Armed with this knowledge, Maria approached the evening shoot with professional skepticism. Old buildings accumulated stories like dust. Most were exaggerations, urban legends, or coincidences blown out of proportion. She was here to sell a house, not chase ghosts. The front door stood slightly ajar despite being locked when she'd left that morning. Maria made a note to contact the listing agent about security, then pushed inside. The late-day light streaming through the windows had a different quality. Now, more amber and dense, creating deeper shadows in the corners. She began in the master bedroom, a spacious area that had once been the station manager's quarters. As she adjusted her camera settings, movement caught her eye in the viewfinder. A dark figure stood at the far end of the hallway, tall and unnaturally thin, wearing what appeared to be a wide-brimmed hat. Maria lowered the camera. The hallway was empty. She raised it again, peering through the viewfinder. Nothing. Old house, tricks of light, she reminded herself, but her hands shook slightly as she resumed photographing. The digital display showed each image clearly, but when she reviewed them later, she would discover something else. In every shot that included a mirror or reflective surface, a pale face appeared, watching her from impossible angles. The baby monitor in her equipment bag crackled to life, though she'd left it at home to keep tabs on her 8-month-old daughter while her mother watched her. Static filled the speaker, then faded to reveal the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, and definitely not her child's. Through the interference came a whisper, "She's so beautiful, Maria. Such a beautiful baby." Maria's blood turned to ice water. She grabbed the monitor, switching through channels, but the voice continued on each frequency. "We've been watching her, waiting. The little ones are so lonely here." She was running before the voice finished, abandoning her equipment, fleeing the converted station as darkness fell across the city. Behind her, she could swear she heard the sound of children laughing, echoing from the empty rooms like a recording played at the wrong speed. Tokyo, Japan. 3 days later, the video had been online for only 12 hours when Yuki Tanaka found it. She'd been monitoring paranormal investigation forums since her encounter at Tokorozawa High School's bathroom, where she and 3 classmates had summoned and barely escaped the spirit known as Hanako-san. The experience had left them changed, sensitive to supernatural presences in ways that made normal life nearly impossible. The video showed an American woman, Maria, according to the description, documenting a converted railway station in New Orleans. At first glance, it appeared to be standard real estate footage, but Yuki's trained eye caught the anomalies immediately. The shadows moved independently of any light source. Reflected surfaces showed images that weren't there. And in one brief moment, as the camera panned across what appeared to be a children's playroom, a pale figure darted between the frames, the same entity she'd encountered in that Tokyo restroom. Yuki contacted her surviving teammates, Hiroshi Sato and Mei Chen, both now university students struggling with the after effects of their supernatural encounter. Within hours, they'd booked flights to New Orleans. The presence that had hunted them in Japan had somehow followed this American woman home, or perhaps it was part of something larger, a network of connected hauntings that spanned continents. They arrived in Louisiana, carrying EMF detectors, digital voice recorders, and a determination born from trauma. Yuki had researched Maria Delgado through online directories and social media, learning about her family, her work, and most importantly, her infant daughter. If the entity was escalating, as their experience suggested it would, the child was in immediate danger. In New Orleans, October 15th, Maria hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard whispers from empty rooms, felt cold breath on her neck, saw shadows moving where no shadows should be. Her mother had taken the baby to stay with relatives after the 3rd night of unexplained crying, and the incident with the nursery mobile spinning backward while no air moved through the house. The Japanese students found her at a coffee shop in the French Quarter, exhausted and jumpy, clutching a cup of chicory coffee with both hands. Yuki approached first, her English careful but clear. "Miss Delgado, my name is Yuki Tanaka. We need to talk about the railway station property." Maria looked up, taking in the 3 young faces, serious, haunted, familiar with fear. "You're not reporters, paranormal researchers," Hiroshi said, settling into the chair beside her. "We encountered something similar in Japan, the same entity that appears in your video. I don't know what you're talking about," but Maria's protest lacked conviction. The video she'd uploaded to her real estate blog had captured more than she Did intended, images she couldn't explain and didn't want to acknowledge. May opened her laptop, showing Maria a series of photographs from their Tokyo investigation. The pale figure was there, lurking in bathroom mirrors, standing in empty hallways, always watching with eyes like black holes. This is Hanako-san, but not the traditional version. Something older, something that feeds on fear and isolation. It's been following us for 3 years. That's impossible. So is a baby monitor receiving transmissions from an empty building 20 miles away, Yuki said gently. So is hearing children's voices in a place where 7 miners drowned 80 years ago. So is your cousin calling your name from inside a flooded cave in Texas. Maria stared at her. How do you know about Jacob? In Austin, Texas, October 16th. Jacob Morales hadn't entered the water since his experience at Jacob's well, but the dreams wouldn't stop. Every night he descended into that flooded tunnel, following voices that called, his name deeper and deeper until his air ran out and he drowned in darkness. He'd wake gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of limestone water in his mouth. When Maria called, explaining about the Japanese students and their theory about connected hauntings, Jacob was ready to listen. He'd been researching cave-ins and mining accidents, discovering a pattern that stretched across North America. Flooded mines, collapsed caves, underground disasters where bodies were never recovered, and in each location, reports of pale figures, disembodied voices, and an overwhelming sense of being watched from below. The railway station in New Orleans was built over one such site. Jacob's well connected to an extensive cave system that had claimed multiple lives over the decades. The common thread was water, darkness, and the dead who couldn't find their way to the surface. I'm driving down, he told Maria over the phone. This thing, whatever it is, it's not finished with us. Jacob, no, it's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting it follow you home? More dangerous than it watching your daughter sleep? His voice was steady despite the fear. We end this, Maria, before it gets worse. New Orleans, October 18th. They met at the Marigny station as the sun set, casting the converted building in shades of amber and shadow. Maria carried the keys and a flashlight. Jacob brought his diving equipment and underwater camera. The Japanese students arrived with electronic monitoring devices and a determination to face their demons. The property felt different now, charged with an electricity that made the air itself seem to whisper. The toys in the converted office had rearranged themselves into new patterns, not the spiral Maria remembered, but a series of interconnected circles that resembled a map or a tunnel system. The activity is escalating, Yuki observed, watching her EMF detector spike into the red zone. It knows we're here. They made their way through the house methodically, documenting everything. In the master bedroom, the mirror showed reflections that didn't match reality. The kitchen faucets dripped water that evaporated before hitting the sink. And everywhere, the sound of children laughing, just at the edge of hearing. It was Jacob who found the entrance to the basement, a narrow stairway hidden behind what appeared to be a coat closet. The steps were old, predating the railway station, carved directly into the limestone bedrock. At the bottom, a tunnel mouth opened like a wound in the earth. This wasn't on the building plans, Maria whispered, her flashlight beam barely penetrating the darkness ahead. Because it's older than the building, Jacob replied, adjusting his diving gear. This is part of the original cave system, the one that flooded in 1924. The tunnel was partially submerged, ankle-deep water flowing toward an unknown destination. Their combined lights revealed carved symbols on the walls, not Native American or colonial, but something else entirely. Signs and warnings scratched by desperate hands in the final moments before the water rose. Hiroshi's voice recorder crackled with activity, capturing words and languages that predated European settlement. May's camera showed thermal signatures moving through the water, cold spots that flowed like liquid shadow. And Yuki's electromagnetic readings went completely off scale. They were not alone. The first manifestation came as they waded deeper into the tunnel. Maria's flashlight flickered and died, then came back to life showing the passage ahead filled with children. 7 small figures stood in the water, their clothes from different eras, some wearing 1920s knickers and suspenders, others in more recent attire. All of them were pale, translucent, with eyes like dark pools. The miners' children, Jacob whispered. They've been waiting. But these weren't the only spirits present. Behind the children, something else moved through the water, the pale figure from the photographs and videos, the entity that had followed them across oceans and through decades. It was larger here, more solid, feeding on the concentrated fear and tragedy of the site. And standing at the very back of the tunnel, where the darkness was. Absolute. A tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat watched with interest. The Hatman, drawn by exhaustion and terror. A predator that fed on the moments when human willpower finally cracked. "We have to turn back," Yuki said, but found their retreat cut off. The tunnel behind them had filled with more figures, not children this time, but the 7 miners who'd died here, their faces blue-white and bloated, their eyes reflecting the flashlight beams like mirrors. They were trapped between the past and something far older, in a space where tragedy had worn the boundary between worlds thin enough to step through. The pale entity moved closer, and they could see that its face wasn't quite human, features that shifted and flowed like water, trying to mimic their expressions but never getting them quite right. It reached toward Maria with hands that were too long, too flexible, fingers that bent in directions that made her stomach clench. "What do you want?" she demanded, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. The thing that might have been Hanako-san, or the pale figure from the caves, or something else entirely, tilted its head with inhuman curiosity. When it spoke, its voice was every child who had ever been lost, every person who had drowned in darkness, every spirit that had been forgotten by the living world. "We want to go home. We want to see the sun. We want what you have, breath, warmth, the feeling of being alive." "You're dead," Jacob said. "You can't have those things, but you can give them to us, just for a little while, just until we remember what it feels like." The Hatman stepped forward, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone. "They've been trying so long to claw their way back. I've been watching, waiting, feeding on their desperation. But now I'm hungry for something more substantial." The children moved first, rushing forward through the water with inhuman speed. Maria felt small hands grab her legs, pulling her down, their touch burning like ice. She heard Yuki scream, saw Hiroshi's recorder spark and die as supernatural energy overloaded its circuits. Jacob disappeared beneath the surface, his diving light creating crazy patterns in the churning water. But it was May who found the answer. As the pale entity reached for her, she held up her camera and activated the flash. The sudden burst of light sent the spirits reeling backward, their forms wavering like smoke. The flash had captured their essence, frozen them in the moment between existence and memory. "Light!" she shouted. "They can't handle direct light." The tunnel erupted in strobing flashes as they triggered every light source. They had cameras, flashlights, even the screens of their phones. The spirits shrieked and retreated, but the Hatman only smiled, unaffected by their desperate defense. "Light fades," it said calmly. "Batteries die. And I am very, very patient." It ran through the flooding tunnel, water rising around their ankles, then their calves, then their knees. Behind them came the sound of pursuit, not footsteps, but the wet slide of things that had never learned to walk properly, the splash of entities that moved through water like it was air. Jacob led the way, his diving experience letting him navigate the flooded passages even as they filled completely. He'd brought spare air tanks, sharing regulators as they swam through, sections where the tunnel roof disappeared beneath the water line. But even underwater, they weren't safe. Pale hands reached for them from the darkness, and voices called their names through the water itself. They surfaced in a wider chamber, gasping and shivering, their lights barely functioning after the water damage. This was the original mine shaft, the place where 7 men had died when the cave-in released an underground river. The walls were carved with their final messages, names, dates, prayers in multiple languages. The whole tunnel system is connected, Jacob realized, studying the chamber layout. This links to Jacob's well, to cave systems across the country, maybe across the world. A network, Yuki agreed. Hanako-san didn't follow us from Japan. She was already here, part of something global. Every tragedy, every drowning, every disappeared child feeds into the same source. The water began to rise again, and with it came the spirits. They poured into the chamber like a tide of memory and loss, hundreds of them now. Every person who had ever died in darkness, every child who had vanished into water, every life that had ended in fear and isolation. At their center stood the pale entity, no longer trying to mimic human features. It was vast now, terrible, a living embodiment of every nightmare that began with, "What if I can't find my way back to the light?" "You understand now," it said, its voice echoing from the walls themselves. Every abandoned place, every tragedy, every moment when someone calls for help and no one comes, it all leads here, to the place beneath the world where the lost things gather. The Hatman moved through the crowd of spirits like smoke, touching each one, feeding on their despair. But as it approached the living humans huddled in the center of the chamber, something unexpected happened. Maria stepped forward. "You want to go home?" she said to the pale entity. "You want to see the sun? Then take me." "Let the others go, and I'll show you the way to the surface." "Maria, no!" Jacob grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. "My daughter is up there," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "My family, my life, everything I love. If taking me stops this, if it keeps that thing away from her, then it's worth it." The pale entity tilted its head, considering. Around it, the spirits of children began to weep, not from sadness, but from a kind of desperate hope. "You would do this? Trade your life for theirs?" "I would. Even knowing that you will join us? That you will become lost, forgotten, just another voice calling from the darkness?" Maria looked back at Jacob, at the 3 Japanese students who had crossed, the world to help her, at all the people she was responsible for. Yes, the entity reached for her with those impossible hands, and Maria felt her warmth begin to drain away, her breath becoming visible in the suddenly arctic air. But as the life force left her body, something else happened. The chamber began to fill with light, not artificial light from their failing flashlights, but something else, warm, golden, natural light that seemed to come from Maria herself, as she gave everything she had to guide the lost spirits home. The children stopped weeping and began to smile. The drowned miners lifted their faces toward the impossible sunlight. Even the pale entity paused, its features softening into something almost human as it remembered what warmth felt like. Only the Hatman resisted, snarling as the light burned away the shadows it needed to feed. It reached for Maria with claws extended, but Jacob was there, interposing himself between the demon and his cousin. "No," he said simply. "You don't get to have her." The Hatman struck, and Jacob fell, but his sacrifice bought the others precious seconds. Yuki, Hiroshi, and Mei linked hands around Maria, adding their strength to hers, refusing to let her face the darkness alone. The light grew brighter, and one by one, the spirits began to fade, not into nothingness, but into something else. Release, peace, the end of their long wait in the darkness beneath the world. The pale entity was the last to go, its face finally settling into human features. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, who had been lost in these caves longer than anyone remembered. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone, following the light toward whatever came after the long night underground. The Hatman screamed as the light consumed it, its form dissolving into shadow that flickered and died. Without the spirit's despair to feed on, it was nothing, a parasite that could not survive the death of its host. New Orleans, October 19th, dawn. They emerged from the tunnel system. As the sun rose over the French Quarter, battered, exhausted, but alive, the basement entrance in the Marigny station had collapsed, sealing the passages beneath tons of limestone and earth. The building itself showed signs of settling, cracks appearing in walls that had stood strong for decades. Maria was unconscious but breathing. The doctors would later say she'd suffered from severe hypothermia and dehydration, but she would recover completely. Jacob's injuries were more serious. 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung from the Hatman's attack, but he would heal. The Japanese students returned to Tokyo with their equipment destroyed and their footage corrupted. But with something more valuable, the knowledge that they had faced their demons and won. The presence that had haunted them since high school was gone, banished along with the network of connected spirits that had fed on tragedy across the world. Manila, Philippines, November 2nd, the taxi pulled up to the curb in the rain, its windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the monsoon downpour. The driver, Miguel Santos, leaned over to peer through the passenger window at the woman standing on the corner. She was American, he thought, pale skin, dark hair, wearing a simple dress that should have been soaked through but somehow remained perfectly dry despite the rain. She raised her hand and Miguel pulled over. "Where to, miss?" he asked as she settled into the back seat. "The airport, please." Her voice was soft, tired, with just a trace of an accent he couldn't quite place. "Southern American, maybe?" Miguel adjusted his rearview mirror to get a better look at her face, but the reflection showed only empty seats. His blood turned cold, but he kept driving. He'd heard the stories every taxi driver in Manila had. The pale woman who appeared during storms, always asking for the airport, always vanishing before they arrived. Some said she was a nurse who died in a car accident. Others claimed she was a tourist who'd never made it home. But Miguel had never heard anyone describe her as speaking English with a Louisiana drawl, or mention the way she clutched her purse like she was protecting something precious inside, a photograph perhaps of a child she would never see again. "You know," she said quietly as they drove through the flooded streets, "I thought I was going home." I thought I was done with all of this. Miguel glanced in the mirror again. Still nothing. But I think, she continued, her voice growing fainter with each word, I think some spirits can't rest. Some of us get caught between worlds, trying to find our way back to the light. By the time they reached Ninoy Aquino International Airport, the back seat was empty. The fare was still there, exact change placed neatly on the vinyl upholstery. But the woman was gone. Miguel sat in his taxi in the loading zone, rain drumming on the roof, and tried to convince himself it had been a dream. But the money was real, cold to the touch, and when he looked at the bills closely, in the airport's harsh fluorescent lighting, he could swear they were older than they should be. American currency from the early 2000s, worn and faded as if they'd been carried in someone's purse for a very long time. He kept the fare, but he never forgot the ride. And sometimes, late at night when the radio played soft jazz and the city lights blurred together in the rain, Miguel Santos would catch himself looking in the rearview mirror, hoping to see her again, hoping that somehow, somewhere, Maria Delgado had finally found her way home. Epilogue, New Orleans. 5 years later, the Marini Station property was demolished in 2004 after a series of structural failures made the building uninhabitable. A small park now occupies the site, with a memorial plaque honoring the 7 miners who died in the cave-in of 1924. Children play there during the day, their laughter echoing across the grass where the old railway platform once stood. Jacob Morales never went cave diving again, but he became a certified rescue diver, specializing in underground recoveries. He saved dozens of lives over the following years, always listening for voices in the water, always watching for pale shapes in the darkness. He never found any. The Japanese students, Yuki Tanaka, Hiroshi Sato, and Mei Chen, completed their degrees and went on to successful careers in technology and academia. They never spoke publicly about their experience in New Orleans, but they maintained contact with Jacob, sharing information about paranormal incidents around the world. The network of connected hauntings they discovered seemed to have gone quiet, as if something vital had been severed. Maria's daughter grew up healthy and happy, raised by her grandmother with stories about her mother's courage. She became a teacher, working with children who needed extra help finding their way. And sometimes, late at night when she was grading papers or preparing lessons, she would feel a presence nearby, gentle, protective, filled with love. The echoes beneath the world had grown silent, but the love that had driven them away lived on, passed from one generation to the next like a light that would never fade. In the end, perhaps that was enough.